Who was your rabbi? Who did you study under? Surely there was some master of the law that taught you, since you know so much. And yet, who was Jesus' rabbi? Who had he learned these things from? He'd learned them from his Father. And that's what amazes me about his response. Okay? Jesus answered them and said, "My doctrine is not mine." I didn't make this stuff up. It's not coming from me. It's not mine, but his that sent me. So here we see this first glimpse of him pointing them upward to the Father. And he'll do that over and over and over throughout this week's material. So the doctrine isn't mine, it's God's. And then this all-important verse. John 17:7, if any man will do his will, God's will that is, as taught and personified by me, then he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. After all, you're wondering, who's this coming from? Am I just making this up as I go? Or is this truth? Remember early on in the book of Mark when they were blown away by Jesus' teachings and they said, man, this guy speaks as one having authority, not as the scribes. Scribes are Bible bashers. Scribes know quote chapter and verse. Scribes can point down to the page. They're a scribal, written focus. And that's where you get the authority, from the Word. And yet Jesus was the Word made flesh, and he doesn't have to quote chapter and verse. He's the one that gave those chapters and verses in the first place. He doesn't have to quote himself. He can just be himself and speak. He speaks as one having authority. And that was so odd for this scribal religion. Well, here, again, there's this sense of where'd you learn all this stuff? I mean, you don't have an education. And he's like, oh, there's more than one way to get an education. And I don't try to show off my book smarts, though I know the book. I helped write it. But to me, it's more about street smarts here. It's more about action and putting into practice the things that I'm teaching. Because if you'll do that, if you put some skin in the game, if you'll experiment upon the Word, as my friend Alma has said, then you'll come to know for yourself that it's true. Because you know what? You can usually tell when you're living a lie. Can you tell when you're living the truth? The Spirit will come and confirm it. Your joy in seeing the results of this kind of lifestyle will come as confirmation. Just try it. Put it into practice, and you'll be amazed. We talk about orthodoxy, and doxy is where the doctrine comes in. Orthopraxy is where practice comes in. And will you practice the life of Christ? Will you live the gospel of Jesus Christ? Because if you will, you'll come to know that it had an inspired source. When Abraham says that he knew there was greater happiness and peace and rest for him, how did he know? He wanted to live according to those lessons he'd received from the fathers. Act on it. Live these things. I call this a pragmatist epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? And for most people, it's a rationalist epistemology. You need proof, and there's a scientific empiricism, and this is the evidence that it's all real. Okay, that's one approach. But I love the Lord's approach here. Just live it. There's a practicality to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Do I need to explain the law of tithing, or can I just invite you to live it and then watch what God does with your 90%? Do I have to hire a dietitian to explain the value of the word of wisdom? Or just live it and watch yourself run and not be weary and walk and not faint. Live the Christian life and you'll end up being convinced of Christianity. That's what Jesus is getting at here. It reminds me of what Alma says, is not this real? Not just is not this true. Of course it was true. But more than that, it was real. Real life. Go live it. With all of its messiness and its challenges and trials, its sins and sorrows, through it all, just lay hold on the gospel of Jesus Christ and live it as best as you can. And the proof is in the pudding. Taste it. Experience it. I cannot explain it unless you try. So try.